So I'm here with Shawn Kindle from Ohio, from Cleveland, Ohio, and he is a businessman and he's also doing a PhD in organizational management. Shawn, thanks so much for being here and for your time this evening. Can we start off just talking a little bit about your experience with HS and other chronic illnesses that you've been affected by?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for asking. I'm excited to share. It's been an interesting journey, specifically with my HS, but also, as you mentioned, I also do have some additional chronic illnesses that have all been a part of my journey. But I'd say that HS is probably the one that, in its onset, knocked me back on my heels probably the farthest. But I will say that that particular journey, I think I learned more than anything else. And that's, coupled with, any of my, academic ventures. And that's in just the learning experience itself. I remember my onset just like it was yesterday, although it was, oh, wow, when I think about it, it was about 16 years ago. And I recall I was actually doing my undergraduate studies, and I was actually about to commence on a trip. And I remember feeling, so my HS is actually relegated to my underarm area. And I'm pretty transparent about that. But I remember when I first began to kind of feel some different sensations, the nodes, and it just felt like maybe there was some sort of outbreak. And I remember at the time I shared it actually with some family members. I shared it with my mom, and she just thought that perhaps it was just something, maybe I had an allergic reaction. I kind of, brushed it off, but I noticed that the pain was there, but I tried to, mask and try to tolerate the pain, whereas it was just getting worse and worse. So fortunate enough, I elected to actually go into a medical physician and kind of pointed out the issue. And I thought that it was kind of odd. And they actually were able to share that I had the onset of hidradenitis, which I had at that point in time never ever heard of. And I had no idea what they were telling me. What does this mean? Is it going to go away? And again, at that point in time, because while the medical professional was able to diagnose, they could really share very little outside of what it was, and the fact that it would be something that I would need to not only topically treat, but also be conscious of the fact that likely, my flares were due to the fact that there were some things going on in my life, like stress, that were likely causing that. So I needed to really make some drastic decisions about, hey, what are you going to allow to get to you? Because now this is going to start to impact your health. So I remember the initial diagnosis, going into a medical physician. And then I recall, as I tried to change some of my life patterns, it just seemed like things actually got worse with my condition. It went from a point where there were just smaller nodes to where, the flames were so extensive to that for me to basically normally function on a day-to-day basis, it was just masking everything. I mean, the pain was, that extreme. But because of, my role, and, I had recently gained employment because had just wrapped up my undergraduate studies. I had to figure out a way, okay, how are you going to treat this, make sure that it does not get worse, make sure that you take care of yourself, and yet not let anybody else find out about it. The biggest thing was I didn't want anyone to find out about it, not because I was embarrassed, but because I didn't want there to be this feeling or thought that, whatever type of endeavor I was going to embark into, I couldn't perform. Whether that was at my employer, I think at the time I was very actively involved. I didn't want to not be able to do some of the things from a fitness perspective or doing any type of sports. So my thought was, well, the only way that I will prevent people from looking at me differently is to not share. And I would say, as I think about having more conversations and especially meeting people, who are either at an early stage of dealing with HS or even further along, that was probably my biggest mistake, was trying to conceal it. Obviously, it has to be taken care of, but so much comes from just sharing your story, sharing your experience, and, perhaps allowing other folks to kind of open up and share, because, everyone has their own war stories, and maybe it's not identical. Maybe the next person you talk to may not be dealing with HS, but by you sharing your story and kind of leaving yourself open, you leave yourself open to also the opportunity of kind of learning from someone else based on whatever level of resilience that they have because of their own health journey, or maybe it's something outside of health. So that was a big mistake I made trying to conceal it. But anyway, for years and years before I entered into the stage that I'm currently at right now, which I like to describe as remission, but more than anything else, it's just fortune. I remember I had just different processes in terms of what I had to do on a day-to-day basis to just continue to conceal it. Now that I don't conceal it, I can go on and on with stories.
You're doing a great job, Shawn. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you manage that and still pursued a career and also your academic achievements as well.
Sure, absolutely. So great question. As I recall, I had a very front-facing role at the time. I was actually a management consultant. And so what that meant was I was constantly on client sites. And not only were we constantly on client sites, but we had long hours and we were required to be dressed professionally. So it was, suit and tie. And so for those who are familiar with the experience or who have HS, depending on your article of clothing and temperature and level of stress, certain things are probably not just the best environment. And I think that at the time of my onset and my career at the time, there were some challenges, but I figured out some different type of processes that allowed me to continue to kind of hide it. So for example, we traveled across the continental United States to different client sites and for our engagements. And so I would travel with a team. And it, not only did I actually travel with a team, we actually lived together. So you had an apartment with your team. You guys worked your 10 hours day together. So you were constantly together. But none of my cohorts, and we were very close, and I love them to death. I mean, we are still extremely close, awesome professionals. They had very little knowledge of what I was going through because of the processes I had. So for example, if we had to be on a client site at 7:30 in the morning, and so we lived in an apartment together, let's say the other gentleman would typically get up at maybe 6:30 a.m. Well, I'm going to get up probably at about 5 o'clock a.m. And here's the reason for that, because since we were going to be dressed in our, dress shirts and shirt and ties and sports coats all day, I needed to make sure of a couple of different things. I needed to make sure that I was able to get up in enough time to make sure that I was able to clean my HS areas. And then in addition to that, because we were wearing dress shirts and we might be going out in the field, I needed to make sure that if jacket came off, and there was an issue with one of my flares, then it wouldn't be readily recognizable. So I had a process. I would get up every day, and again, I'm pretty transparent in what I'll share. I would get up, I would go in front of the mirror by myself, and I would actually, because I wouldn't have gauze pads, or what I found to actually be kind of a better setup, I would have tape, and I would place sanitary napkins up under each one of my armpits, and I would figure out a way to hold the tape in place and tape it all the way around to make sure that it was secure and clean. Then I would apply my undershirt, then my dress shirt, and then I felt like, okay, if something does happen where there's some sort of, I would just say an issue with one of my HS areas, and I have to raise my arms or something to that nature, no one else will be the smarter. So I just had that process. And so likewise, as we were on client sites, while everyone else would, maybe go out for lunch, I would then, middle of the day, I'd have a process where I would go into the public restroom area. I'd go into a private stall. I would have a private mirror, and I could go and basically change that wrap in the middle of the day. And then likewise, I do it at the end of the day. So that was kind of like the process that I had, as I was going into my professional arena. Likewise, when I would engage in different type of, sports activities, because at the time, I still hadn't given up things I've given up now, like, playing basketball and things like that. And so I had to make sure that I was covered up to the extent that, nothing would cause any type of trauma to any of my areas. But I did have some incidents where that didn't fare well. In addition to that, kind of going back to kind of how I would make sure that I was set when I went into my professional environment, I did have an experience pretty extreme where I was probably about 500 miles away from home, and there was an incident that occurred, and I did have to I ended up having to go into the emergency room because it was unbearable, but at the same time, again, I'm traveling and I'm living with my workmates. I had to, in the middle of the night, leave out while they were all asleep and take the car that we all shared. And I drove to in a great hospital, John Hopkins Hospitals in Baltimore, Maryland. And they had to go through a procedure that, many folks who are familiar with HS know about, which is the lancing process, because
Mhm.
I was not able to bear. And I went through that, and then I was able to make it back to the apartment. And then the next day, I got up and nobody knew what happened.
Oh my goodness, Shawn. Wow. That's some serious secret keeping there. Well,
Yeah,
it's such a normal thing for people with HS to do. It's just to kind of like to try and hide it and not let people know. So, and it's really sad. So that's what this is all about, though. This is these videos, raising awareness, making it normal, making it acceptable, and kind of trying to remove the stigma of that. You've had some amazing experiences, and I'm sure troubling experiences and dark days as well. And I'm sure you've loads of advice for people living with HS. So if you had to pick one or two kind of key bits of advice for people maybe struggling with their HS or trying to manage it, or another chronic illness, what would your advice be?
sure. That's a great question. I would say that HS, coupled with, other conditions that folks might be managing, such as myself, along with it, I would say that it is a learning experience. And so treat it as such. And I have not always been able to respond that way. Kind of going back to, what I was just sharing as far as, hiding and concealing. Again, it wasn't because of any level of embarrassment, although obviously as you're managing a condition, there's that level of, well, I don't think individuals are going to understand. With that learning experience comes owning that journey and really being proud. Again, I know that it seems kind of odd, if not cliche to say, because there are so many trials and tribulations, but we have a great story. And our story has been what we have learned. We know so much more about our bodies because of what we've had to study, because of what we've had to endure, because of the type of practices and processes that we put in place, because of the things that we have learned to cut out. And so continue to own that journey, be proud of everything that you've learned, and really just, treat every day as something new. As you keep that open mind and you're not hiding, you're not concealing, you're not worrying, you're not stressing, not only does that open you up to have great conversations like what we're having right now, but you're dealing with less stress. You're holding less in. And we have all found that that is a primary trigger for a lot of our flares is holding in. So, what good does that do us? And there's no level of embarrassment because at the end of the day, the more time you spend talking to people, you're going to find that everyone is managing something. It's just how long is it going to take them to open up? So if you can open up, based on your story, based on your experience, whether it be medical experiences or, maybe, where friends have had to come in, maybe just to be, mental or emotional support, those type of things that you share open you up to have conversations that can benefit someone else in their walk. It can inspire them. And then they, in turn, 10 times out of 10, they're going to share with you something that you haven't heard from the person that you shared with last week, last month, last year. And it's going to be something that you can continue to take on your journey. It's going to be a story. You and I, we will share stories that are unique from the story that you share with your friends and maybe even cohorts that know our HS journey and have experienced it, and me likewise. So then when we come together, we have all that, that's all a part of this big bubble of inspiration that we have for one another. So, just keep telling. I remember there was a point in time that I felt like even with my family and past going to medical professionals like this, boy, they cry wolf because nobody understands this condition, or nobody wants to hear about this because dad's sick and something's wrong, or brother's sick. And that's no way to look at it. People want to know because you never know down the line where they might have some sort of experience that they need to kind of refer back to what you shared, or they might be caring for a loved one, and they'll remember, you know what? I talked to Suzanne and I talked to Shawn. I remember that they were very transparent and how they got through, and I can get through. Or I can tell my brother or sister how to get through, or my parent or my children how to get through. So just being open, just being proud, and just, taking each day as they come. They can be tough. I'm not one that sugarcoats, but I think as we continue to have these conversations, we can share war stories and we can share strategies, and there's different solutions and phenomenal companies that are out there coming up with things to help us, but we won't know about those things if we keep our mouths closed. I remember my mom used to always say, a closed mouth does not get fed. And I think that absolutely pertains to our walk and what we can share and what we can hear along this journey.
That's super advice, Shawn. I think will resonate with a lot of people watching this. So thank you again, Shawn, for your time. It's been fantastic chatting to you as always. And I wish you all the best.
Good night. Thank you so much for having me. And just wishing everybody out there who's on a very similar journey to ours, just, all the inspiration and success in the world, because the days ahead are going to be great as we all, figure out strategies and we see, our conditions get to controllable states. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Shawn.